close the inside. Yeah. So hello, for those of you on Zoom, we're starting the first 15 minutes. The plasma talk will start at 6:15, but we're starting the discussion with students in the DMS 211 now. So I wanted to start by saying, are there any students here in the room? I know a lot of people are on Zoom right now who have questions about the final assignment. Everybody's you're good on it? You know what you're writing about? Imagine you might be writing about this presentation. Yes. When's it due? May 21st. It's on the syllabus and on UB Learns. All of the materials, so every single thing that you've done, if you're posting late materials for questions and whatnot, it all has to be in by May 21st. You can submit it early. Yes.
Do we need 3 quotes total or like 3 quotes from each speaker?
3 quotes total is your minimum. No. Because some people will only be writing about one speaker, right? Great question. The question was how many quotes, for those of you on Zoom, how many quotes total do you need? And as the assignment says, it's 3 quotes is your minimum. So you have to have at least 3 quotes from the speakers and or the texts that you read, okay? Minimum. Other questions? Those cover the 2 major points. Okay, so Andres and I will have office hours next week. So office hours for Andres are 3 to 5 p.m. in person upstairs. What's your 270? 270. Yeah, so CFA 270 is Andres's office. And you should email him first, but you can also just stop in. And I will have office hours on Tuesday between 1 and 4 p.m., both tomorrow and next Tuesday on Zoom. So you can just, but you need to send me an email. But I'll be on Zoom and I'll send that information out so that if you just have a question, you can pop into Zoom, okay? Yes, good? Okay, I'll send an email out about our extra office hours for people with questions. Are you sure there are no other questions? So again, I'll just remind you that the assignment is to write about either 1 or 2 speakers, or 3 if you want. The point is to write about something from the whole class. So it's a takeaway that the most interesting, in quotes, the most fascinating or the questions that stay in your mind based on one speaker's presentation, to take that up and not to copy what you wrote in your first initial response, but to think about how those ideas or their work has stuck with you or challenged you over the course of the semester. So to draw from the things that you really, you learned about what is media art. At the beginning of the semester, I talked some about the difference between watching things online and having the opportunity to have live speakers here and to experience it in this room together, to be screening things like we did in the first class with Juan Carlos, to watch a film together. What those experiences are, different. We had a whole range of different kinds of speakers talking about different work, and so to be able to draw something from that that really sticks out for you in terms of adding to your ideas about what media art is, or what kind of critical ideas about contemporary issues as they relate to media and technology, or so you can write about, are you going to write about more than one? You've got like 3 speakers or 2 speakers, and it's a theme that you're writing about, right? So if you want to write about a theme, that 2 speakers have a relation between each other, or 3, or something that you can draw about the whole semester, go for it. But the idea is to make an argument, right? To actually have a point to your essay, and that to have a thesis. And that you are going back into the resources that the artists supplied for you that were required reading or screening, in addition to the recordings that are up online for you, to actually draw a minimum of 3 quotations from the artists, and also additional references from the readings that they suggested. But you can also find other sources. The most important thing is that you actually use citations for all of your sources in your essay. And the last thing is that you need to have a title. And the title can't be the name of the artist, okay, or Plasma 2023. I know it's so tempting to do that in all of your essays or final project, but I really want you to think some about the title, okay? Yes? Right. So you're going through the assignment portal on UB Learns. So that offers the opportunity to upload a Word document. So that is the option you need to choose. Do not, under any circumstance, write, and I'll add this to the assignment, under any circumstance, write your paper in the prompt space. You all know this by now, right? You've used UB Learns before, but under no circumstance should you start typing into the UB Learns prompt space, okay? You should be doing this in a Pages or Word document and hitting save regularly before, and then you're going to upload it as a document. But I'll add those details in, so thanks. Okay. Anything else? Did we see Mark somewhere? Out in the hallway? Yes. A Word document. Yeah, Word document, definitely. I think all of your professors probably have the preference of Word document, right? No? Okay. In media study, we prefer Word documents because if we want to give you comments, we can do them easily in a Word document. As opposed to, I mean, PDF we can do it, but it's more like Post-its, right, on it rather than making edits. Anyone else? Any thoughts? People want to share what their topics are already? Do you want to share what your topic is, like who the 2 artists are you're going to write about? Who are the 2 artists? Juan Carlos. Oh, great. Great. Anyone else have thought about who they're going to write about? Yeah. Great. Great. Anyone else? Already have an idea about who you're thinking about writing about or topics? Some of you, are you all waiting? Yeah. Christina Corfield. Terrific. Anyone else? I mean, we have saved the best for last. So you all will probably want to write about Jen and Derek tonight. But, you know, in case you want to talk about some of the other people in relationship to Jen and Derek. Namely, actually talking about Lindsay Kaplan and her writing and thinking about the digital and the program and how that might contextualize some of what Jen and Derek are doing. That's an option. I also just want to say to the class as we're waiting for 6:15 to roll around, which is that I saw that you all were lovely, you know, had great responses and quite interested in all the amazing videos and promos and information on Jen and Derek's websites and their specific projects. But I really encourage you, if you didn't, to read the chapter that was also required assignment. And so this not only contextualizes their work and talks about one of their projects, but even more importantly, it's a really fantastic intervention into some of the kind of pop cultural discourses around AI. It's an extremely useful and smart framework for cutting through some of the hysteria and kind of to sort of think more about the what's at stake in discussions of the fake and misinformation and disinformation. So maybe we should go find Mark. Oh, you can go, okay. And for those of you on Zoom who are joining us, we will start the plasma lecture at 6:15. So in 3 minutes, and I'm in the process of talking to the students enrolled in DMS 211. Do you see any questions online back there on the Zoom? Okay, thank you. Because I know a lot of students are missing today. But we're going to get started in a few minutes. Yes, that would be great. Here, I can put that there. Do you want help with that? Okay. Okay. Last options. This is our last time to be in person together as a class. So really, no last questions? I do encourage you, please, to fill out the course evaluations. It's a way for me to understand what some of the things are that worked and didn't work in the class. So please go online and you can be that's a much more kind of bureaucratic form, but if you have also comments about things that that you want to send directly to us about the class, please do. I know that some of you were disappointed I didn't have more narrative filmmakers, but part of the idea behind the class was actually to expose you to ideas about media art that aren't the ones that you found in mainstream. And so over the course of the semester, I saw that many of you started to engage that on a couple of different levels. But I just still want to encourage you to give feedback. And you can do that in the comments section in the final assignment, or sending me or Andres an email, however you'd like to, okay? But, okay, so I think I'm going to get started. And this is the thing you'll be speaking to. So welcome to everyone here and on Zoom. Welcome to the final lecture of Plasma 2023, the Department of Media Study here at University of Buffalo's performances, lectures, and screenings of media art, the course and the public lecture. This series is sponsored by the Department of Media Study, along with funding from the Office of the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here at University of Buffalo, in addition to resources from UB Art Galleries and Squeaky Wheel Art Center. This series this year was curated by me, Dr. Paige Sarlin, Assistant Professor of Media Study, but also with the help of Sylvie Fortin, the curator of the exhibition I Don't Know You Like That, which is still up in UB Art Galleries here in the CFA, and also at the Anderson Gallery at 1 Martha Jackson Place. It'll be up until May 12th, so you just have 4 more days to see it both here and there, and I encourage you to go see it. And in addition to the input and help of Ekram Serdar, as well as support from the Humanities Institute. So that's the series. This is the final class. And I'm not going to say too much because I could go on. But the speakers tonight are Jennifer Gradecki and Derek Curry. And to introduce them, tonight is Mark Shepard, who's the Associate Professor of both Media Study and Architecture here at UB, and the author of a recent book, There Are No Facts, published by MIT Press this past year. And he writes about their work, in addition to having been a significant interlocutor on both of their works over the course of their time here at University of Buffalo. So without any more to say, here's Mark Shepard.
Thanks, Paige. And before I start, I also want to thank you for curating an amazing series of lectures this spring. Plasma, as you may or may not know, is a thankless task, for faculty to take on. It's a lot of work, and I think she's done a great job. So, at the culminating lecture, can we just give a round of applause for Paige? Right? It's with great pleasure that I introduce Jennifer and Derek tonight. As Paige mentioned, I did have the opportunity to engage with both of them while they were here at UB, arriving from LA, maybe not directly, but from LA, directly from LA, from UCLA's MFA in new genres, entering here at a time when both media study and art had this relationship called emerging practices, right? So one thing Paige mentioned in her introduction was just that, over the course of the semester, you've been introduced to a number of different kinds of media practices. And I think that one of the things that's important, specifically with Jennifer and Derek's practice, is to recognize how critical media art practice engages with contemporary technologies in ways which might not normally be familiar to us. Right? And I think tonight they're going to show us a number of examples of their work in this area. So moving between questions about surveillance, questions about data valence, questions about machine learning. How many people have learned or heard about machine learning, right? How many of you have used DALL-E 2 to make media, right? How many of you have felt like, why is Netflix recommending this movie to me? Yes, right, at least one, right? Derek and Jen have been looking at these ideas for quite some time. So predating the current hype around ChatGPT or DALL-E 2 or Midjourney, any of the diffusion models, they've been working in this space critically and creatively, right? And so I think, we get an insight to a way of addressing contemporary media practices through a lens which enables us to step back and reflect critically and creatively on these practices. As the bios that you received in the email announcing this event, they're internationally recognized, have exhibited at places like Electronica, the Science Gallery Dublin, although I didn't see that in the bio, and a number of other places, which are, pretty remarkable places in and of themselves. And they're doing outstanding work, and they're continuing to do it. Both Jen and Derek are currently assistant professors at Northeastern University, and they come to us tonight in a kind of homecoming, I'd say, or at least for me, it's a homecoming. And so thank you for making the trip. Thank you for taking the time. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce or turn it over to Jen and Derek.
Hopefully, are these audible? Can you hear me?
Can you hear it?
Can you hear me? Through my microphone, maybe not.
How about me?
I think this isn't working super well.
So
We
let
can
me,
get this set up.
let me get this. So I don't even remember my password.
Hello. Is it audible in the Zoom especially? Yes. Okay. I don't know.
Okay, hold on a second.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, sounds good. Excellent. Yes, am I audible? Can you hear? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Do you want me to turn down the lights a little?
Maybe just the ones that are on the screen. Oh, do we have control?
We do. There. We can do,
Oh.
what do you want to do, half? Is that better?
I think that's much better, yeah, because
Okay.
there's going to be a lot
Okay.
a lot of content.
Yeah.
Okay.
I should have remembered that. I've taught in this class a few times while I was here. This presentation, we're thinking of a few different frameworks that we could use, but we decided to use a framework from a book chapter that we co-authored by the same name, Artistic Research and Technocratic Consciousness, which is just one of the theoretical frameworks that we use to frame our work when we talk about it. So we're going to start with a project as an example, so you can experience it outside of the academic framework, which is how most people encounter our work. And then we'll explain the framework and what technocratic consciousness is and how our work attempts to deal with it. And then we'll show some other examples of our work after that. And then I'm assuming there'll be a Q&A or something like that. But if anyone has any major questions in the meantime, feel free to ask them if something's not clear. So our work is collaborative. It's research-based. It's material and discursive, meaning we make art objects that embody knowledge, and we also write about it. And sometimes we are writing about the things that we can't figure out how to embody in artwork at the time. And it's also based in tactical media and institutional critique. That would be our artistic lineage, more or less. And we also try to incorporate a critical technical practice. And is anyone familiar with that? It's a term I learned while I was here by Philip Agri. For this presentation, we thought we would start with a shocking fact. So we're part of this residency right now where we're working with startups. So we're getting a lot of pitch training and learning how to present ideas to venture capitalists investing in startups. So we thought we'd try that format out here. So shocking fact, over 96% of criminals have a face. So think about that for a minute. Think about the implications of that. Maybe look around you, see if the person next to you has a face. Next, we need to find the pain points, right? So if you're going to make a startup, you have to figure out what it is that people really need. So you want to offer a solution to a problem, not just find a way to prevent a problem that might occur. In other words, you need to sell medicine, not vitamins, because people who are sick need to buy medicine, while people who are well don't necessarily have to buy vitamins. And the last thing that we learned from our pitch training was don't show a video. But we're artists, so we're probably going to do that anyway. And I'm assuming that there aren't any venture capitalists here looking to invest in a startup. Maybe there aren't. Anyone? Yeah. Maybe that's true. That might be online. So we'll talk later if there are any. So we'll start with the video.
Facial recognition has become a vital tool for law enforcement around the world. But police officers don't often have clear, high-quality images of suspects. Fortunately, the current lack of regulation allows for the use of creative technological solutions. One solution has been brute forcing facial recognition by substituting artist sketches, computer composite images, and even images of celebrity doppelgangers to find a suspect. Savvy law enforcement agents understand that to be effective, you need to also be well versed in meme culture and cult movies from the 1980s. That's why our algorithm is trained on the faces of characters from the 1984 movie Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo. By using this film, we are able to accurately identify members of the anti-law enforcement militia, the Boogaloo Boys, who took their name from the film. Once key members of the Boogaloo movement are identified, social network analysis can then be used to identify other members. Tools such as degree centrality and closeness can reveal how the Boogaloo network operates through a decentralized command and control structure. Boogaloo Bias is the first facial recognition system that provides a ready-made brute force surveillance solution. Our system can generate hundreds of leads from live video feeds and video footage of protests that Boogaloo Boys were reported to have attended. More suspects lead to more arrests. By maximizing the number of total arrests, the likelihood of apprehending guilty suspects is dramatically increased. Citizen snitches can contribute to the Orwellian surveillance apparatus by uploading photographs to search for suspected Boogaloo Boys among their friends, family, and even themselves. Boogaloo Bias, facial recognition by any means necessary.
Okay. Thank you. This is a great audience. So the project is an interactive installation and an online app that highlights some of the known problems with law enforcement agencies' use of facial recognition technologies. It was commissioned by Science Gallery Detroit in 2021. It focuses on the practice of brute forcing, where in the absence of high-quality images of a suspect, agents have been known to substitute images of celebrities a suspect is said to have resembled. The Boogaloo Bias facial recognition algorithm is trained on faces of characters from this 1984 film, Break Into Electric Boogaloo, and the film is the namesake for the Boogaloo Boys, who are an anti-law enforcement militia that emerged on 4chan meme culture and that have been present at protests since January of 2020. I think I've lost my mouse. There we go. Okay. So the system uses these movie character faces to brute force the generation of leads to find members of Boogaloo Boys in live video feeds, videos of protest footage, and images that are uploaded to the project's website. And every match in our system is a false positive. In the gallery installation, you can see 4 examples here. Viewers are interacting with the facial recognition algorithm through a live CCTV camera, and they can see which break-into character the system finds to be matches. Viewers are able to see how their matched character can sometimes change as they move their head or change facial expressions, which reveals how easily this process can be compromised. The installation also includes video footage from various protests that have been scanned by the Boogaloo Bias facial recognition system. And when possible, we like to add site-specific footage depending on the country that we're showing it in or the location. And this has been possible, of course, when we're showing the project in countries that have Boogaloo Boys, so the US and Canada. And in the installation, there's also informational brochures that viewers can take with them so they can learn more about the project. The brochures, just like the video, parody a data analytics company's promo materials, and they provide information about the project, and they also have a QR code so you can go to the web app as well. And both the website and the installation include 2 interactive social network analysis diagrams that show connections between characters in the film. The SNA diagram on the left is a manual mapping of the relationships between the characters in Breakin' 2. And after watching the film, I drew connections between the different characters. And the diagram on the right was generated algorithmically by using the Boogaloo Bias facial recognition system applied to the film itself. So if someone was recognized in a scene with another character, it would draw connections between them, increasing in thickness depending on how often they were together on screen. So you can see there are many more connections drawn in the algorithmically generated diagram. The main connections are pretty accurate, but there are many other spurious connections as well. The diagrams also have informational text that explains how law enforcement agencies use SNA diagrams. They plot out connections between members of targeted groups to understand, predict, and intervene in human behavior. They often try to, quote-unquote, neutralize actors that are seen as important in these networks. And there are a lot of assumptions in these diagrams. For example, they assume that the groups that they target are hierarchical, when this might be true of an intelligence agency, but it's not necessarily true of an activist group. And the website also features a resource library that links to research about the unregulated use of facial recognition in the US. It also provides information about the Boogaloo Boys militia and information about social network analysis techniques. The project draws from a number of academic and journalistic sources, including a study by the Georgetown Law Center on privacy and technology, which found that because there are, quote, no rules when it comes to what images police can submit to a face recognition algorithm to generate investigative leads, unquote, agents have been known to substitute not only low-quality images from CCTVs, but hand-drawn forensic sketches, proxy images generated from artist sketches, and images of celebrities that were thought to resemble a suspect. The website for the project has a web version of the facial recognition system where online viewers can upload images of themselves or their friends to see which characters of the film the system finds to be matches. And we save no information online or in any of the physical installations. The project also features numerous videos of protests that have been scanned by the facial recognition system. And you can find these on the project website as well as in the installations and on the Vimeo page for the project. Boogaloo bias also reveals problems that arise from using low accuracy thresholds. While some tech companies have stressed that police should use confidence levels between 95 and 99%, law enforcement agencies often use low out-of-the-box accuracy levels of 80%. To maximize their investigative leads. And the Boogaloo bias system, as you can see in this video, returns every match, and it highlights the matches that are above the 80% out of the box threshold. You can see those in pink. So participants can see the impact of confidence thresholds on matches that the system returns. And the project is currently on display at the Justice exhibition in Science Gallery Atlanta until September 30th, if you might happen to be in Georgia between now and then. And we're also going to be presenting about the project in Berlin on June 23rd as part of Disruption Network Lab's Artivism Conference, which we're excited about. Switch it over to Derek.
Okay, so yeah, how many people have seen Breakin' 2? Anyone? Yeah, a couple of people, yeah. What did you think? Like it? Hate it?
It was a long time ago.
Yeah.
It was when I was still.
Yeah, it's sort of...
My taste may have balls.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a bit of a cult movie now. Sometimes when we're talking about the project, we find people that just love that movie. And so the project's super fun for them. So yeah, maybe a little bit about our theoretical framework, and then we can try to fit Boogaloo bias into it. So technocratic consciousness deals with the way that experts create systems to organize people and activities. The concepts explained more fully in a chapter that we wrote for a book called Retracing Political Dimensions, which is probably available through the UB library if you're interested. If you're really interested and you can't find it, just let Paige know and we can get a copy to her to pass on to you. But it's based on the idea that there's a ruling elite called technocrats, and technocrats are individuals with technical training and occupations who perceive many important social problems as being solvable with the applied use of technology and related applications. This is coming out of Taylorism and other scientific management techniques. By controlling the development of technology and by using specialized knowledge, technocrats are part of a power elite that can make decisions that impact society, influence politics, and determine who's subjugated in industrial and consumer processes. In other words, they help to design the physical and social world that most people have to live in. Sometimes they work alongside or within the government, like former chair of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan. Sometimes they're purely academics, like the behaviorist B.F. Skinner. Quite often they're just titans of industry, like Mark Zuckerberg. Occasionally they go back and forth between the government and industry, like Robert McNamara. And historically, they've been white men, though more recently, the younger generation of technocrats is a little more diverse and includes people like Sheryl Sandberg, who created the targeted advertising business model, which is often considered to be why social media and search engines spread disinformation, increase polarization, and can be used to undermine democratic processes. Technocratic power is not simply top-down. It exists within a complex system that involves humans and social connections. The physical arrangements of space and the technologies that we use to interface and navigate the social and physical worlds are all part of this. Technologies that control how people think are a big part of technocratic power. In the first half of the 20th century, this was really overt, and many technocrats would explain their intentions in plain and straightforward language, like Edward Bernays, who's considered to have invented the public relations industry, as one of the most sought-after advertising executives at the time, said in a book that he unironically titled Propaganda, "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society." Bernays argued that most people don't have the time or ability to research complex issues that they're asked to make decisions about. Therefore, it's the job of the technocrats to reduce the world to 2 or maybe 3 possible options that are acceptable to the power elite for the public to choose between. This process is now mostly done by algorithms and tailored to individuals using their personal data. You can think of Google search engines, movie recommendations, social media feeds. Most of what you interact with online is configured in this way. One of the first technologies to automate the process of online data collection is web cookies. Cookies were invented to track behavior on the web, mostly to measure the effectiveness of advertisements, but now cookies and other tracking technologies are used to target people based on their individual preferences and influence their behavior. Sometimes the way these technologies influence people's behavior is entirely unintended, like how YouTube or Facebook's content recommendation algorithms that are designed mainly to show viewers more ads end up spreading conspiracy theories. You know, think of how the flat earth theory became a thing again because people would just fall into a rabbit hole on YouTube. So Jürgen Habermas, anyone familiar with Jürgen Habermas? So Jürgen Habermas has claimed that technocratic consciousness has replaced ideology. So with ideology, people submit to the power of a dominant class because of false consciousness, which is to say they tell themselves that they're in a better situation than they actually are, the people in power deserve it, and if they work hard, they too can achieve the things that they deserve. With technocratic consciousness, people are just cynically submitting to power structures because they like the things that it gives them. Few people believe that Mark Zuckerberg deserves to be a multi-billionaire or has their best interests in mind, or they'll also be a multi-billionaire if they just work hard enough. But people still give social media companies their personal data because they like the things they get in exchange. So with technocratic consciousness, we know that things are messed up, but we try not to think about it too much because changing things means giving up conveniences, and it'll only work if everyone does it. So what Jennifer and I are interested in with our artwork is how power is manifested within this socio-technical system. And in our projects, we try to reveal how technocratic power structures operate or show the spaces where intervention into the system is possible. So quite often we focus on areas that are usually left unconsidered. So in Boogaloo bias, the example you just saw, the socio-technical system includes several factors, including the technology of facial recognition itself, which can be fairly accurate in a controlled environment. So if you can control the lighting and the position of the person's face, and you have multiple high-quality images of the person that you want to recognize, you can achieve some very accurate results. The market demands are another aspect. The main goal of the market demands is to produce a commercial product that can be sold. So in many cities, there's already a very robust system of surveillance cameras in place. So a facial recognition system that's demonstratively accurate, it's a relatively easy sell. But then you also have the reality of implementation. So the reality is that the network of CCTV cameras that's already in place produces low quality images from cameras that are usually up high, looking down, so they're at angles that aren't conducive to facial recognition. And then you also have the demands made on law enforcement, which are to find suspects and arrest them. Facial recognition is another tool that can give them leads when they may not have any. So when police don't have access to good images of a suspect, they end up resorting to tactics that they were using before they had facial recognition technology, which are forensic sketches or descriptions of suspects from eyewitnesses. Even though facial recognition doesn't work that way, how computer vision recognizes a face through the geometries of the features on someone's face is not how humans recognize someone that they know when they see them. So how did we get here? As you might have heard a few minutes ago, Jennifer and I are both graduates of SUNY Buffalo, which I'm guessing some of you are probably familiar with. Anyone heard of SUNY Buffalo? Yeah, a couple of you? Thought there'd be more. So we thought some of you might be interested in the work we were doing while we were here.
Yes, so I will briefly talk about, or we'll both briefly talk about our dissertations. So I conducted a comparative analysis of intelligence analysts and artists that were working with surveillance techniques and technologies. And I juxtaposed the different metaphors and conceptions of data and information that were held by intelligence analysts and the artists that study them. And it was my practice-based approach that led me to focus on information. In 2012, when we were living here, Derek and I found out that we were on a watch list and we were detained at the Canadian border. And in response to this, I began researching other artists, writers, intellectuals, and activists who were targeted by intelligence agencies. I made a series of FBI portraits in 2012, visualizing the descriptive words in each file, and one of the most frequently used words in every file was information. In the 2 years following, I submitted 2 Freedom of Information Act requests, and one of these cases evolved into a 3-year lawsuit with the Department of Justice. But after rejections and redactions, neither request resulted in any useful information. So this struggle over information, the intelligence community's preoccupation with information and their resistance to revealing information underscored its central importance to their practice. So through an analysis of intelligence agency documents, I found that analysts have quite a few assumptions about data and information, many of which can be traced back to the technical metaphors that they use to understand their work. They tend to see data as raw facts and the analytical process as narrowly empirical, despite the fact that their research and their analysis is very philosophical. They reject deduction, intuition, and metaphysics while embracing induction, rationality, and empiricism. And in contrast to this, artists investigating the surveillance state remain aware of how representations are incomplete generalizations and how they impact surveillance, both how it's understood and how it's practiced. And they continue to regard data as constructed artifacts and remain open to considering the role of interpretation, irrationality, and speculation in their practices. And by proposing alternative ontologies and epistemologies, these artists provide critical counterpoints to the dominant narrative of the intelligence community. And I discussed this in a Leonardo article that just came out last month, if you might want to read more about it. I have a link to it here.
So my dissertation research was on automated decision-making in finance, or basically how the use of AI creates technocratic power structures that have shifted how markets are controlled and who can control them. I thought this was a good idea when I started because there was relatively little research done on it. I realized a little too late that there's a good reason for that. Hedge funds don't tend to publish all of their strategies for people writing PhDs. But one event that was informative to me was when the Syrian Electronic Army, a terrorist organization, hacked the Associated Press's Twitter account in 2013 and posted a tweet that said, 2 explosions in the White House and Barack Obama's injured. Within 3 minutes, the S&P 500 lost 121 billion, with a B, $billion, and then recovered just as quickly. What was interesting to me is that real traders knew at the time the tweet was fake because it said Barack Obama and the Associated Press would only refer to the president as President Obama. And this was curious to me because I mean, this is relatively easy to program, right? Like a sophomore could do this, you know, just make a check and make sure it's always saying President Obama. What I found in my research is that because of the way high-frequency trading works, speed is privileged over accuracy. So it's more important to be the first one to make a trade rather than to have the correct information. So I started experimenting with natural language processing algorithms and reverse engineered sentiment analysis, the sentiment analysis used by high-frequency traders to calculate financial sentiment. And one project that came out of this research was a Twitter bot that was connected to a galvanic skin response sensor that when a user's stress level went up, the bot would create posts about financial institutions that were responsible for the 2008 crash. And does anyone remember 2000? Who was alive in 2008? It's like ancient history now, right? But yeah, so companies, mostly banks that were responsible for the 2008 crash and the LIBOR rate fixing that resulted from it, posts would be created about them that had negative financial sentiment intended to negatively impact the stock price of those companies. And this eventually improved the sentiment analysis and expanded it into an app called Public to Sentiment, which eventually became my dissertation project, which was a tool for activists to create social media posts to negatively impact the stock price of any company that they might be protesting. And so this worked by collecting actual news stories about these companies and reading them for sentiment and then storing them in a database so that they could then be tweeted out or shared on Facebook later on. It was designed to be used by a swarm of people. So you needed a bunch of people using this app at once for it to actually work. And you could think of this as like a 21st century boycott. So rather than not patronizing a company, you could actually impact the investors of the company directly. And if you're interested in how the project works, I wrote an article about it that explains it. It's called Hacktivism in the Age of High-Frequency Traders. And there's also some technical details on the project's website, publictosentiment.org, though the app is no longer working.
Yeah, so in the midst of working on our dissertations, we also developed the Crowdsourced Intelligence Agency while we were here. And this project was commissioned by the Science Gallery Dublin in 2015. And the CSIA is an online app and an interactive installation that replicates and displays some of the known techniques used by intelligence agencies to collect and process open source information. So we use technical manuals, research reports, academic papers, leaked documents, and Freedom of Information Act files to build an open source intelligence, or OSINT, system that was accessible to the public. And OSINT is intelligence that's gathered from publicly available sources like social media, academic articles, and other public data. And the goal of this project was to expose problems, assumptions, and oversights that are inherent in current data-valence systems, and to really help people understand the effectiveness of OSINT processing and its impact on our privacy. So I'm going to show an informational video. It describes a bit more of the research behind the project, and then it also shows some of the features of the project. Oops, or not.
We now know that our social media posts are being read by intelligence agents. We sometimes say that it doesn't matter, that we have nothing to hide, but we don't really know what they're looking for. What's it like to be an intelligence agent and look at what people post? How do you know what someone really meant if you don't know them and you only have 140 characters to go on? What little we do know comes from leaked files, technical manuals, and documents released through Freedom of Information Act requests. And sometimes when the system fails, there's a story in the media. like the 2 British students who were denied entry into the US by threatening to destroy America and dig up Marilyn Monroe. Of course, we were joking. Or the trial of the Boston bomber, where there was ample physical evidence linking Sarno to the crime. But the social media evidence presented by the FBI hurt their case. Some lyrics and jokes were presented as threats, and the FBI had thought that a photograph of a mosque in Grozny was Mecca. They didn't even bother to look at a picture of Mecca. Computers running machine learning algorithms can automate this process and label tens of thousands of posts per second. But if there are mistakes in the data used to train the algorithm, those mistakes will simply be replicated. How does the presentation of data affect how an intelligence analyst interprets it? How does metadata change what an intelligence analyst thinks when they see a social media post? What's it like to be on the other side of the screen? Maybe there is a way to know what intelligence analysts are going to think about posts.
So the app has 5 components. The social media monitor, which is a surveillance interface that allows users to evaluate tweets based on their threat to national security. There's a resource library that links to documents that informed the creation of the app. There is a watch list where users can target any public Twitter account to see how our machine learning classifiers automatically rate tweets from those accounts. And they can also provide feedback on the algorithm's judgment to improve their accuracy. There was also a social media post inspector where users can enter text to see if a social media post would be likely to be considered a threat by intelligence agents before they post on social media. But what we really want to focus on today is our naive-based supervised machine learning classifiers, which automatically labeled tweets as suspicious or not. And all of our classifiers use a naive Bayes algorithm. And naive Bayes classification is nothing more than a statistical comparison of features from a test case to features in a model. And in the case of social media posts, the features are the words used and then possible word pairings. So naive Bayes is the machine learning classifier most commonly used by intelligence agencies because it assumes independence among features. Analysts only need to know that something is a threat to include it in a naive Bayes training corpus. They do not need to necessarily know why it is a threat. And we have multiple classifiers in the CSIA, and each classifier was trained on a different corpus. So we had the crowdsource classifier, which was trained on a corpus labeled by visitors to Science Gallery Dublin, and we ultimately had over 16,000 tweets that were rated. We had a terrorism classifier that was trained on tweets from the accounts of known terrorist organizations like ISIS and Boko Haram. We had an intelligence agency classifier that was trained on tweets from the official Twitter accounts of intelligence agencies. And then we had the Agent Bayes classifier that was trained on a corpus of tweets that I manually labeled after researching and simulating the processes and judgments of intelligence analysts. And CSIA agents were able to give feedback on the idiosyncrasies and the accuracy of the predictions.
So how does machine learning detect threats? It doesn't. It only detects patterns in language. So if you say something similar to what a terrorist says, the machine learning algorithm will flag your post. So imagine if terrorists are tweeting about music that you happen to like or TV shows that you happen to watch. It's very possible that you could end up on the same watch list that they're on. So what goes into a training corpus for a classifier is important. But even with a good training corpus, there are still problems specific to machine learning. One of those is called overfitting. And this is something that we learned firsthand when we were creating our crowdsourced classifier, which, as Jennifer said, was created by tweets that were labeled by people that went to Science Gallery Dublin for the exhibition. And so these are the vectors from that data set. These are the words that indicate whether something is a threat or not. And you'll notice that the fourth vector from the top is Guinness, and it has a high correlation to a suspicious post. And we thought, this is funny, like, oh, people aren't taking it seriously. You know, it's Ireland, like, people drink a lot of Guinness and they probably get up to all sort of nefarious stuff when they do it. But because we actually had access to the data and we were trying to figure out what was going on, we looked at those posts, like, you know, not just like, okay, this is indication of a threat, like, let's look and see why people were labeling these as a threat. And when we looked at the data, we found that every time that it was considered to be a threat, it wasn't referring to beer, it was referring to Martin McGuinness, the prominent IRA member who became the first deputy mayor of Northern Ireland. I don't know if anyone remembers what the IRA was, but it was a very effective terrorist organization. So to citizens of Dublin, this would have been a legitimate terrorist threat. So this shows that not only are machine learning classifiers prone to error, they're also culturally specific. And you can imagine how this is complicated even further when you're dealing with language translation in the process as well. An intelligent analyst using an automated system where the classifier is a black box wouldn't have access to the training data, and they could logically conclude that drinking Guinness just leads to terrorist activities. So through this project, we were able to make several conclusions. Machine learning systems will automate mistakes if they're trained on erroneous data. If you have flawed data, it doesn't matter how good your algorithm is. So we should explore the possibility that statistical correlation is not the best way to find threats in every case. People are not easily reducible to one thing. Not everything a terrorist says or does is indicative of a terrorist plot. And it's likely that they'll try to hide indications if they really are up to something. And this is easily done by using code words. For example, the 9/11 hijackers referred to the hijacking as the big wedding beforehand. They didn't say, hey, our plot to hijack planes, like when they were communicating with each other. So we published our findings in the Crowdsourced Intelligence Agency Prototyping Countervalence in Big Data and Society, if anyone's interested. And the next project we're going to talk about is called War Tweets. It's a social media game that turned President Donald Trump's tweets into missiles that players could intercept by sending out tweets to Donald Trump's official Twitter accounts, and the game was played using Twitter's interface. I know we're assuming a little bit about your politics here, but maybe bear with us. There's more to it. So we would also agree that microblog posts are not the best format for political debate, but Twitter seems to have been the preferred method of former President Trump. So that's what we used. Here's a video that'll explain it a little bit.
Activism in games means different things depending on the issue you're trying to address. For me, what it's usually meant is trying to explain something complicated, like a financial instrument or something like that, to players that may not have access to the type of knowledge that would help them understand it, or the time or attention span to really delve into certain issues. This game, Trump's War Tweets, is a little different because what we're trying to do is incentivize people to actually use their political speech and talk to the president directly. And it's played like the game Global Thermonuclear War from the 1984 movie War Games. Only orange rockets are launched every time Donald Trump tweets. This happens in real time. Players have to intercept those rockets by replying to his tweets. Actions that you take are actually happening in the real world. So when you tweet in the game, it's showing up on Twitter and becomes part of the presidential record. The game map is actually a map of Donald Trump's mind. So you have things like the Gulf of fake news. On the map is public housing. And if an orange rocket hits the public housing, it blows it up and turns it into a gold Trump tower. It functions as sort of like a data visualization of both his tweets and the gentrification of the Trump empire. I started in performance art and institutional critique and transitioned into tactical media. So the games that I've been making have been coming out of a tactical media space rather than a game space.
I don't know if you know, but I tweeted.
So Jennifer just pointed out that we have more than one project based on a film made in 1984. So interesting to realize. So the basis for this game, it wasn't just to get a bunch of people to tweet at Donald Trump. It's the fact that courts had ruled that the Presidential Records Act that was passed after Watergate applied to Donald Trump's Twitter account. So the National Archives was required to save his Twitter feed and potentially things that people posted on that feed as well. So if you wanted to say something and have it end up in the National Archive, there was a moment in time where you could have just tweeted to the president. Additionally, a federal judge ruled that Donald Trump's Twitter account was a public forum and was a protected space for free speech. So tweeting at Donald Trump was something that couldn't be censored because it would have violated the Constitution. Part of the project involved hacking Twitter's interface so that we could actually embed the tweets in the game. And so if you had a tweet that included a video, you could, in the game's interface, you could watch the video and tweet directly from the interface. You could also, once you signed up as a player in the game itself would monitor your Twitter feed. And so if you were to tweet at the president with #WarTweets, it would also count anything you did through Twitter's interface as a move in the game. And so you could play it online or just purely on Twitter.
Okay. So moving into 2020, Infodemic is a neural network generated video that questions the mediated narratives created by social media influencers and celebrities about the coronavirus. And to give a little bit more context for this project, early on in the pandemic, it became clear that conspiracy theories about COVID were spreading rapidly. There were social media influencers and pundits that were making money on fake cures like colloidal silver and elderberry chew. Others said that you could prevent the virus by drinking hot water or taking mega doses of vitamins, or even using bleach internally. Celebrities, politicians, and influencers were pushing hydroxychloroquine despite a lack of evidence of its effectiveness and potential for heart damage. And even more strange were the connections to new technologies like 5G networks causing or exacerbating the virus that led to cell phone towers being burned down. And maybe the most bizarre of all conspiracies was the notion that Bill Gates created the virus to implant microchips into people to track them. So this term infodemic can be traced back to the SARS outbreak in 2003, but it gained popularity in February of 2020 when the WHO director stated, quote, "We're not just fighting an epidemic, we're fighting an infodemic. Fake news spreads faster and more easily than this virus and is just as dangerous." So an infodemic is an overabundance of information that occurs during an epidemic, and some of it's accurate, some of it isn't, and it can lead to confusion and mistrust. So misinformation about COVID is a result of scientific uncertainty exacerbated by algorithms. Scientific research takes time, and in the absence of an official scientific explanation, the public, of course, was understandably seeking out other explanations wherever they could find them. And as people were sharing false stories and claims about the virus, content recommendation algorithms began to promote and recommend misinformation to people that were seeking information. So this is a complex problem where fears surrounding the virus were exacerbated by uncertainty, misinformation, and disinformation that was being promoted by algorithms, influencers, and people that were lacking media literacies alike. This is also known as a filter bubble, where users are only exposed to news and information that conforms to their ideology. People tend to spend more time on a platform when they get results that conform to their worldview. And this has led to increased partisanship, proliferation of conspiracy theories, and the spread of misinformation and disinformation. Users who search for one conspiracy theory are more likely to have other conspiracy theories algorithmically suggested to them. And this is something that we experienced firsthand when we were doing this project. So we were searching for different misinformation, and after a while, new conspiracies and misinformation about the virus just began to appear in our feeds without having to search for anything. Another factor that contributes to the infodemic is the targeted advertising business model, which is theorized by Shoshana Zuboff as an important part of surveillance capitalism. And under this business model, products or services are offered either free or below cost in order to extract behavioral data from users. Examples are social media accounts, free email accounts, Android phones, Google search results, and the list goes on. Interacting with these products produces metadata that can be analyzed to predict your behavior. And then these predictions are used to create ads that are targeted to individuals, which are far more effective than mass marketing advertisements. And this data is also used to manipulate us into spending more time on a platform to increase ad revenue. So our project Infodemic, as I mentioned earlier, it's a neural network generated video that questions these mediated narratives that were created by influencers and celebrities, and the speakers that are featured in the video are an amalgam of the celebrities, influencers, and politicians and tech moguls that have contributed to the spread of misinformation about the coronavirus by either repeating false narratives or developing technologies that amplify untrue content. And these are some stills from the video.
So to produce the images in the video, we use a conditional generative adversarial network, or CGAN. This was cutting-edge technology when we did it just a couple of years ago. And things are moving really quickly right now. But researchers at UC Berkeley had demonstrated how CGANs could be used for image-to-image translation. So this could be labels to an image, black and white to color images, edges to photos, satellite photos to maps, or facial landmarks to frames in a video, which is what we used. So for Infodemic, we trained multiple CGANs on images of different celebrities, influencers, and politicians who had spread misinformation and their corresponding facial landmarks. So there's the A, B. So if you could, this image would be mapped onto the second image, and so if you gave the algorithm the second image, you could reverse the process and produce the first image from it. Once a model was trained, facial landmarks from other people could be used as an input and generate a realistic image of the speaker as an output. Next, we would find an expert that was countering the misinformation spread by the influencer, like former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb, who debunked claims about the use of disinfectants and UV light that President Trump had famously made in a press conference.
There's absolutely no circumstance in which you'd use ultraviolet light internally in a patient to do anything, let alone treat an infectious disease.
Then we extracted the facial landmarks from each frame of the video of Dr. Gottlieb.
There's absolutely no circumstance in which you'd use ultraviolet light internally in a patient to do anything, let alone treat an infectious disease.
And then we use those facial landmarks to generate frames for a video of President Trump speaking the same words.
There's no indication by which you would use UV light to treat both either externally or internally a virus. There's absolutely no circumstance in which you'd use ultraviolet light internally in a patient to do anything, let alone treat an infectious disease.
So the generation process involved a high level of randomization, and the images actually start as random noise before the algorithm alters them based on their statistical similarity to the model. When the input is facial landmarks from the same video the model is trained on, the results are almost identical. It's impossible to tell which was the original video and which was the generated video. But for our input, we're using the facial landmarks of different people, which adds another layer of indeterminacy because the algorithm is trying to construct an image of one face from the facial geometry of another person. And in many cases, the results were unusable, and we had to keep searching for a speaker who more closely resembled the influencer we're trying to generate. So this was very much an artistic process. We had to learn to think of faces in terms of geometry and found that we could sometimes squish or stretch a video to get better results. So while conditional generative adversarial networks are used in some deepfake technologies, we use them very differently in Infodemic. So in deepfake videos, when a neural network's trained on a single person to produce a convincing likeness of that person. But what we did was we trained our algorithms on multiple people simultaneously. So you would see that it would sometimes morph between different speakers. The result was a talking head that would morph between different speakers or become a glitchy Frankensteinian hybrid of different people that contributed to the infodemic, speaking the words of academics, health professionals, or news anchors that are either correcting false narratives or explaining the role of content recommendation algorithms in the spread of online misinformation. The plastic, evolving, and unstable speakers in the video evoke the mutation of the coronavirus and the instability of truth, as well as the limits of knowledge. And here's a short clip of the video.
The web has a way of just sort of teleporting information to us in this decontextual way where we believe we know what we're looking at, we believe we know what the source is. We believe, we're being critical. But when we stop and take a second and say, do I recognize this source? Are they in a particular position to know something about this? We often find that we don't have that information.
So out of the practice and research for Infodemic, we developed Going Viral. And this project was commissioned by the Northeast of North Festival in Dundee, Scotland. And whereas Infodemic reflects on the spread of social media misinformation, this project intervenes in it. So Going Viral is a net art and tactical media project that invites people to intervene in the spreading of misinformation by sharing informational videos about COVID-19 featuring algorithmically generated celebrities, influencers, and politicians that have made or shared claims about the coronavirus that are counter to the official consensus of healthcare professionals and were categorized as misinformation. So in these videos, the algorithmically generated speakers deliver public service announcements or present news stories that counter the misinformation that they previously promoted on social media. And viewers are invited to share these videos on social media to intervene in the infodemic. And we have a short informational video about the project.
Many people across the world are waiting patiently or impatiently for a coronavirus vaccine, but actually creating a vaccine may just be one hurdle in defeating COVID-19. The next step could be convincing the naysayers to actually take it.
There's absolutely no circumstance in which you use ultraviolet light internally in a patient to do anything, let alone treat an infectious disease.
Now, the novel coronavirus is nowhere close to being eradicated.
No doctor of any repute would prescribe hydroxychloroquine for prophylactic or treatment of COVID-19.
We don't know very much about this virus. All the things that you'll see out there about vitamin supplements and herbs are unproven at this time.
There's absolutely no evidence that 5G has anything to do with the coronavirus. These conspiracy theories have been discredited time and time again.
Just like Infodemic, the videos in Going Viral are made using a pix-to-pix conditional generative adversarial network, or CGAN. However, in Going Viral, each algorithm is trained only on one influencer or celebrity, which is more similar to a typical deepfake video. But it's important to note that the way that we use neural networks in both of these projects is different than a typical deepfake, because we use the algorithms to generate the entire frame of the video, and we don't do any post-production editing to touch up the video after it's generated. And this is meant to foreground the glitches in the algorithmic process in order to raise questions about the constructed nature of celebrity and the veracity of information that's shared on social media. And you can participate in the project and help to counter coronavirus misinformation by sharing videos at goingviral.art. So this will be our last project that we're going to talk very briefly about because it's in process.
Yeah, we usually don't talk about work that's in development, but So Sock Puppet Theater is an interactive installation featuring animatronic sock puppets that speak the words of social media posts from sock puppet accounts that are known to have engaged in disinformation campaigns. So sock puppets are imposter social media accounts created to infiltrate groups, surveil and provoke people, and spread disinformation. The project is being commissioned by the Media Futures Program in the European Union. And it's important to mention that sock puppet content is made to be offensive, so please be aware that we're going to be seeing some potentially difficult material. We got it from the internet. That said, we're not presenting any of the most graphic material. The project draws from Bertolt Brecht's epic theater, which emphasizes audience participation and defamiliarization as a technique for political engagement. Some social media posts featured in the project might be upsetting for people to see or hear, and you can see a few examples on the slide. Some social media posts so presenting content in an unexpected or strange way can allow for critical distancing and reflection on the impact of disinformation, including how you might react if you came across a similar post in your own social media feed. Would you share this? To give some more context, the initial data set we're using is from the Russian Internet Research Agency disinformation campaign in the USA around 2016 that was meant to influence the presidential campaign. And some of the posts actually organized protests and counter-protests in the US without people realizing who was behind it. So they'd organize a protest of Donald Trump, and then organize the counter-protest to that protest, or they would organize a Black Lives Matter rally, and then a counter-protest to that rally. Disinformation campaigns often focus on underrepresented and disempowered groups, and the data set that we've been working with includes Muslims, queer people, Black Americans, who are all targeted. Our project aims to support targeted groups by facilitating the recognition of sock puppet disinformation campaigns. Academic research found that the revelation of a sock puppet has been found to help targeted members of the public identify other sock puppet accounts based on a similarity of post. So audience members, as they scroll through a data set of social media posts made by fake accounts that are performed by the puppets, will become familiar with the tactics used by disinformation campaigns. And these are some examples of Facebook ads posted by the Russian Internet Research Agency agents. In the first version of the project, there's going to be two sock puppets. There's going to be a right-wing and left-wing sock puppet based on the demographic that the sock puppet account was trying to target. These are examples of tweets posted by sock puppet accounts. So while the content between the right and left-wing accounts is different, the tactics used tend to be the same. They tend to try to incite indignation and increase polarization. Oh, I missed one. Oh. So the sock puppet stage is a combination of a classic Punch and Judy puppet show and a dystopian video game or penny arcade. And we're currently finalizing the design of the stage and the 3D printed animatronic hand and the sock puppets themselves.
And as you can see on the left, this is some of the content that users will see in our installation when they select a particular post. There's a reconstruction of the sock puppet account with the post and any video or image that is associated with the post. And then, of course, there's the sock puppet performing the text from the post. And we are currently gathering feedback about the voices, so we would love to hear opinions about this. So I'm going to play 3 different posts with 3 different cartoon-sounding voices.
There's actually one good thing about the Trump presidency. It has finally exposed evangelical Christians for what they are. Misogynists, pedophile supporters, and Nazi sympathizers.
And attempts to cut off the shroud covering Robert E. Lee statue in Charlottesville. Take the burqa off the general.
Liberals are insane! Protesters start to dig up body of Confederate general in Memphis.
So as we often do, we'll be creating an online app as part of the project, and there will be a machine learning classifier where people who visit the site will be able to search their posts from their own social media accounts and see how similar they are to posts made by sock puppet accounts. And we also made the project so it can incorporate future data sets, assuming the data sets are large enough, so when there's a new disinformation campaign, the project can also incorporate that as well. And there will also be a resources section on the website that will show information about disinformation campaigns. And you'll be able to select posts online and watch them be performed by a video of an animatronic sock puppet. And right now, well, actually tomorrow, by tomorrow evening, we will have the site up and running for user testing. So if you're interested to see some of the content, and we would love to get feedback from you, you can go to the site and listen to some of the posts and tell us what you think of the voices. And we'd really like your feedback on what type of content we should include, how we should censor certain things, if we should censor certain things. All of that's really important.
Yeah, and it's just disinformation.theater, so that will be up by tomorrow night. And then the project will be debuted in Hamburg on June 8th and 9th. And we wanted to end by thanking all of the people that have given us unwavering support over the last few years through everything, and we could not have made it this far without you, so thank you so much for everything. And we would love to answer questions or hear comments, feedback.
Yeah, anyone have
Anything
questions?
you want to share?
Let's see, can you hear me through that? Yeah, question? Can you see a hand up?
There is a hand, yeah.
And these are questions based on what you read or saw or just a response?
You said you wanted to know which voice we
Yes,
preferred.
we
I
would
really
love to
liked the
hear
third
that.
voice.
The third, you do like the third voice, okay.
It was perfect. I just wanted to say that.
Excellent, thank you. It's the most theatrical voice of them all, right? And then, okay. Interestingly, we showed this in Rome, was it last week?
Last week, yeah.
And one of the reactions, a lot of people laughed at that voice, but then they said, oh, that actually makes me feel uncomfortable because of the content. And we thought that's really curious, but we're just interested to see different people, different places, how do you respond? The content is very difficult, but when we want enough distancing with the voices so that people will spend time with it, maybe it'll take the edge off of the challenging nature of the data. But thank you for your feedback, I appreciate that. I think we have a hand here.
Thank you for your presentation and for your work.
Is it coming through?
Yes.
Okay.
How about now?
Yeah.
Yeah, so again, thank you for your presentation, for your work. I'm interested in seeing the bias detectors through like Beat Street and Rappin' and Crush Group. I'm kidding. But through your presentation, I was thinking about AI and what are going to be the ramifications with respect to artistry and celebrity. To take it back to hip hop for a moment, on social media, I see a lot of these reproductions of rappers doing these word by word covers of songs by other rappers. For those who follow hip hop closely, or at least the way I do, it's considered blasphemous for another rapper to cover another rapper's work word by word. And then, I also think of, with Drake and The Weeknd, how, there was this popularity of a song they didn't even make. So, in a lot of ways, celebrity and artistry conflate with one another because someone's going to want to see a movie or read something or listen to something because of the person that it's, supposedly is doing it. But at the same time, it can be manipulated to either discredit, someone's artistic credibility, or even, use someone's celebrity against them, and that celebrity is, has to, defend or detract or retract or, try to, they have to respond to something that's beyond their control, something that was created by something else using their persona. As a matter of fact, that's why you have writers in Hollywood on strike right now, because of that very fear. And I'm curious to know, how your work explores that in terms of what you're anticipating coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, this is actually something we get asked to comment on a lot in like news and like journalists. It's going to get weird for sure. I think especially when you have like dead actors and musicians appearing in films, and what happens when the Beatles issue a new album, yeah, I don't know. Do you have anything you want to say?
Well, it also, gets into this very complicated territory of, copyright, and so there's examples of, apps like Lenza where they're taking in all of these, artworks that artists have not given permission to be scraped. But because these are large language models, they of course need a ton of data to work. And so, I think moving forward, there are lawsuits that are in process right now to try to restrict the data sets. I think that would be a huge help to be able to, somehow have things move forward to the point where, people are able to consent or withdraw their consent if they find that something is already in a data set that they didn't want to be. I mean, it's to the point where it's even replicating artist signatures. And so one of the big things that comes up for us that is students asking about this, well, what should we do moving forward? We're afraid that jobs are going to be lost. And my perspective on it is, this is something that has happened over many years, not just with, this new wave of AI, but, my father was a welder and his job was eventually automated as well, and he was really afraid of that happening. And so I would say, yes, there's going to be a lot of jobs that are lost, and, for students that are trying to figure out what to do next, it could be helpful to think about jobs that couldn't be automated. So we know that style is something that can really easily be replicated. So what can you do? What types of skills could you develop that are not so easily replicated? I would argue that an algorithm can't actually be creative. It could just kind of, recreate something that's already been done. And so developing, creativity, critical thinking, those kinds of things can be resistant in some ways. And hopefully we'll have some progress made in terms of being able to, actually regulate what's happening with these huge companies, because it's very secretive. It's hard to understand what's even in some of these data sets. It's definitely a huge issue. It's a concern of ours.
But I think it could be liberating too, in the same way that photography, there's this concern that it's going to replace the role of painters, which it did to a large extent. But it also freed up painters to develop modernist styles and, push the medium into new areas that didn't take it before. I don't know if that'll happen exactly with this technology, but I suspect it will. The other thing that I think, this is less related to like artistic production, is we're going to need another wave or formulation of postmodernism to help people deal with the fact that what they see might be completely fabricated, in the same way that we had to learn that some of the things you see on television aren't real, they're scripted, or, like political events or whatever. And there's that deep fake of Zelensky several months ago now that wasn't very good, so it didn't, I don't know if people saw it or not, but it is a deep fake of Zelensky telling the Ukrainian troops to surrender. But it was flawed enough that nobody actually did it. What happens when that gets a little bit better? What happens when you could have plausible deniability of crimes that were committed, right? You could have people that rob a bank and they could say, oh, that's deep faked, I didn't do that. And in fact, there's some artists making prosthetics that can make things seem like a deep fake. So sometimes when you create something generated with an algorithm, it'll get everything right except for the details. Like you'll have an extra tooth or an extra finger. So they have these like prosthetic fingers that you can put on. So if you go commit a crime and there's a video of you doing it, you can say, oh no, look, there's like 8 fingers in that hand. So, it's going to get weird, and hopefully it'll be entertaining in the process. But yeah.
When you mentioned the Lensa app, I saw that. When you mentioned the Lensa app, the infodemic piece that you showed made me think of that in terms of how all of this data converges to create this singular image.
Yeah, and I think that also connects back to my focus, which is really helping people to understand these systems. I mean, we really wanted to foreground the glitchiness of these images so that people could become familiar with the ways in which they are recognizable as fake. But I also hope that people can develop a certain amount of skepticism towards what they're seeing on social media. Because even with disinformation campaigns, there's a lot of examples where it might be true, but the way that it's being said is still manipulative. And so there's even that dimension of what is the point of that information being shared in that way. So yeah, I think connecting it back to infodemic is a good point. Yeah, I don't know if you want to add to that. No, that's a really good question and comment.
Hi, you guys.
You gotta speak up.
Okay, hello. Can you hear me? All right?
It's actually going to Zoom more than it's going
Got it. Okay. I'm usually some academic that begins with sort of like a comment rather than a question. In this case, I'm not going to do that. I actually have a very earnest question, and it is thinking about tactical media, protest, the whole kind of, I guess, cultural zeitgeist. When I was 20 years ago, it was the right wing who feared a Russian invasion, right? And now you actually have right wing looking like they would collaborate with the Russian invasion. You have, 20 years ago you had the protests of the WTO in Seattle, and now that same scene, you would be seeing maybe a bunch of Boogaloo boys, overtaking, something altogether different. How do you navigate maybe what might also be like sort of a whole kind of almost like a sea change, it would seem, in terms of like, in a sense, the whole sort of perhaps even co-option of some of the tools we use in tactile media, or some of the ways that we've also in the past probably been skeptical of things. And I say we, I guess maybe that's not the right word, but I guess in general it seems like there's been a kind of appropriation of some of the cultural tactics of the left by the right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think a lot of what Steve Bannon was doing is actually great tactical media in a way, unfortunately, because it's fairly effective. But yeah, so I think on the one hand you have like the tactical media was sort of only a tool for the left to use in the 90s and early 2000s, and now it's seemed to have expanded beyond that. I think the other aspect to that is tactical media to a large extent operated as a type of pen testing in certain cases, where you have artists, they find a space to intervene, a temporary autonomous zone or whatever, and they occupy it, and they get an art show out of it, and they get written about, and then that space closes down, and then something happens where it's like, oh, we could have used that tactic for something that was more meaningful than a line on a CV or an art show or something like that. And so we're very aware of that, I guess, in terms of like how we operate. We're careful, like for example, my dissertation project, I didn't open source it because what I made could be used to manipulate the market, and I'm like, well, you know, like what happens if other people get a hold of it, and that's why I made it so that it could only be used with a swarm of people to make sure that you had like a large group of activities. It wasn't just one person who had a vendetta or something like that. So we build things like that into our process, and also try to, while we're documenting it or making it, reveal how the system works as well, so that people become skeptical of what we're doing, so that when it's appropriated by another group, potentially it'll, you know, be at least a little suspect. I don't know if you have something you want to
Yeah, there's so much to say. I mean, I think in some ways have the benefit of being able to look at all of these things that have happened over the last 20 years and reflect on. I mean, it's just every project in one way or another is recuperated, it seems like, or every tactic. And so we're very cautious of that with our projects. But I don't think that's new. I think that's something that tactical media practitioners were always trying to kind of reflect on. So, you know, with the crowdsourced intelligence agency, we found that the majority of people that were signing up for it were actually in the military or in some type of contractor position, and you could see that with their email addresses. So we're like, okay, these are the people who are interested.
A lot of .mil, Booz Allen Hamilton email addresses.
Yeah, and I presented at Northeastern to a group of people from Ericsson, and one of the people came up to me and they said, oh, I'd really like to build an OSINT system myself. We should work together on this. And of course I didn't do it. But so that was also...
Do you want to explain to this who Ericsson is and what that situation is?
I don't know that I know that much about Ericsson specifically, but I mean, you know, a corporation like this is not going to be using, you know, something like this for critical or even
pedagogical,
beneficial, you know, and they would be trying to, what he actually wanted to do specifically with it was look for insider threats within the corporation. So they'd be using it for surveillance, and exactly the thing that we're trying to help people to resist. It would be implemented in that way. And so, you know, we've even learned from our own projects, and so then with Boogaloo bias, for example, which was a couple of years later, we made it so that, of course, we're not collecting any data. There's no, you know, database whatsoever. And the corpus itself is just completely absurd because that's, you know, the content that we wanted to deal with, we wanted to reflect on, but we also really did not want to simply replicate another corpus that used, you know, mug shots or something like that. So our practice has to always evolve. But again, I still think this is very like classical tactical media in some ways, because we're making do with the circumstances that we have, and we know that these are temporary interventions and that the opportunities will close up, and we have to try to make the projects as resistant as possible to co-optation in order to feel confident enough to put them out, but also be aware that they will be recuperated to a certain extent. So we're very, very cautious of what we're putting out into the world. No, it's such a good question.
Another thing that happened with the CSIA, which was unexpected, was there was someone from the Netherlands who, when you went to the website, it said like become an agent, and you could sign up and be an agent, and like this was all very tongue-in-cheek, and it never occurred to us that some people might not be hip to that, and so he signed up, and this is, we would create a new data set for every time the project was exhibited, and we would surveil the other artists in the show and the people associated with the venue. And suddenly, like, it had been months since we had a show, and I'm getting a notification that the database is full. And I'm like, why? Like, what's wrong? Did it break? And I look, and it's like somebody went through and like evaluated all this stuff. And I'm like, what's going on? And then he friended Jennifer on LinkedIn and was like, hey, like, I'm a CSIA agent and I need a mission. And like his LinkedIn profile is like our logo. And we're like, is this guy, like, is he messing with us? Or like, but I think he was for real. And he wanted a mission. And we were like, should we send him on a mission? Like, he might do it, but that was something we had not like considered at all. You know, like could we like manipulate people who are willing participants in this like fiction that we created? And
yeah, it was bizarre. That was an unintended impact. And we didn't give him a mission because we were not sure who we were dealing with exactly. But yeah, I think this question of, I think this is really important for anyone who's starting out trying to create interventions or trying to do tactical media, to just be aware that there's countless examples of projects that maybe started out critical to a particular corporation or corporate technique that were then appropriated for those ends, and just to be aware that that is something that is most likely going to happen with a project like that.
Even Twitter, maybe.
Twitter is a great example. I mean,
Twitter.
Well, Tad's project.
Yeah, that's true. You know, Tad's.
Yeah.
Why am I blanking? I can't think right now.
TextMob.
TextMob, right? So TextMob. Is anyone familiar with TextMob? It's not. Yeah. So this was an early tactical media project by Tad Hirsch, who we interestingly enough work with now at Northeastern, that was a SMS messaging network for activists to use, and he released the source code of TextMob and gave some coding workshops on it, and this became the basis for the original version of Twitter, which you may or may not remember, operated only through SMS messaging, and that's why tweets were limited to 140 characters, because that was the limitation of SMS messages at the time. This was used in the DNC and RNC protests in 2004, and Tad was subpoenaed by the NYPD to disclose all of the people who had used his project. He was actually a student at the time as well. And so he had to fight that. And so we're learning from things like that too. So when I made public dissentiment, I also did not collect any data because I didn't want to have to turn over information to anyone, knowing that that's a real possibility, which as a PhD student trying to prove that I did something new was a real problem, because how could I prove that this actually worked? You know, this is a proof of concept, but there's no proof, you know. I could speculate, so people could add companies to be protested to the database. And the first company that was requested to be added was Energy Transfer Partners. Does anyone know who they were? I didn't know who they were either. They're a construction company that was building the Dakota Access Pipeline at the time. And so I monitored the stock price of the Dakota Access Pipeline after I added it to the database. And there was also real-world protests happening at the time, and the stock price did become volatile immediately after it was added. I like to think that that's a proof of concept, but I don't actually know. You know, there's a lot of market forces at play and real-world protests happening. So that's, I guess, another danger of working in this area. If you're going to try to also be a researcher and have a real-world impact, is to the extent that you have a real-world impact, you might be liable legally or financially, or you might end up having to give up other people that you put at risk through what you did. So.
Is it okay if I have another question from faculty? First, thanks again for coming and sharing with us your work. It's great to get an update. I'm curious about, much of your work has been focused on the notion of classification. And working with machine learning classifiers, you come to learn that everything gets ranked in terms of an ordered array based on degrees of confidence. And typically, the first object in that array has the highest degree of confidence, and so therefore this must be Guinness. Yeah. In that case, it was correct, it was accurate, but the frame of reference that we had as humans for Guinness was different. In other cases, you talk about classification where I can wear a prosthetic finger, and I can willfully get myself misclassified with a high degree of confidence by a classifier that's trying to look for deepfakes. I wonder, though, given your kind of work with these classifiers under the hood, so to speak, what do you make of things that are ranked low confidence at the other end of the array not so much the false positive, but the things we're really not sure about with these classifiers. And what have you come across in terms of your work with them regarding the other end of the spectrum, the bottom of the barrel, the things that we're not quite so confident about?
That's interesting.
That's a really good question.
Do you have anything you want to say, or should I
I don't have
say?
an immediate example, but
I find them to be fascinating, and I think that's where the real world exists. And my first inroad to this was through finance, and I always think of it in terms of black swan events, which if people aren't familiar with, to say something was a black swan was kind of like saying that it's a unicorn, like it doesn't exist. You're looking for a unicorn. So if something was a complete impossibility, you would call it a black swan. And this existed for a few hundred years until English settlers ended up in Australia and found that there's a lot of black swans. And so now this is like a stand-in for things that we think are impossible, events that could never happen. And then it turns out that they're totally possible and they might happen on a regular interval. And so in finance, every time you hear there's a financial crisis, it's like, oh, this is like a 1 in a million year event or something. But, we had one 9 years ago too. So, maybe our conception of what a million years is a little off. But, yeah, and in the statistics, these are usually considered outliers and problems that you either get rid of through filtering out, or you consider them outliers or whatever. But I think that those are the things that are actually interesting within, not like the normal stuff, but like the noise. But
yeah, I think it also connects to the concept of the unknown and indeterminacy, which is interesting. And I, think of the research that I did into intelligence analysts who, in their intelligence reports, they're always kind of instructed to, at least in the documentation I was able to get access to be very almost overconfident about what they're classifying and how they're categorizing things, because they're really trying to persuade people to, enact a certain policy. And so artists who are dealing with the same material can really kind of revel in these areas of indeterminacy and areas of uncertainty. And I think that starts to show where these systems break down. And I think that can actually lead to, the ability to help people think skeptically or think critically about, systems that are really inscrutable. I'm trying to think of a specific example, though, and I'm not thinking of one. I think that would be interesting of, in one of our projects, if we found classifications that were, very low, but potentially interesting. I can't think of one.
I think,
It's such a good question.
The false positives, I think, like with the crowdsourced intelligence agency, what was really interesting is one, that it worked better than I expected it to. So when we first made it, I'm expecting it to, if it's better than 50%, I'll be happy. And it was 91% accurate. And I'm like, oh, that seems a little high. And then, so I turned it loose on Twitter and immediately found ISIS. And I'm like, oh, I guess it works. And that's not really remarkable, right? You're looking for ISIS and you find them. And of course, when they're in Syria, they can say whatever they want. So they do. And what's more interesting is when you're looking at the feed that comes in and you're like terrorist, definitely not a terrorist. And then you get something you don't know. And are you more inclined to think that this is actually a tweet by a terrorist because you saw 3 prior that definitely were? Or is it just like a 15-year-old kid who lost at a video game and he's making idle threats, and sometimes it's really hard to tell.
Yeah, that's true. There were a lot of gray areas in that project when we spoke with people that were, especially at Science Gallery Dublin, that were trying to make these decisions. They found it surprisingly difficult to determine if something was a threat or not. And it's interesting because this is, I think, of course, not discussed by a data analytics company that's trying to promote their product. They would never say, there's all these gray areas that you couldn't possibly classify.
Yeah.
But yeah. I think that's
Another interesting example is we gave a presentation at the Open Doc Lab at MIT, and it was a relatively small group. So we surveilled all the people we knew that were going to be there without them knowing, so we could surprise them. And most of them, everyone has a few posts that are suspicious. To a certain degree. There was one young woman there who had a lot of them, and she's like, wow, like I'm, definitely like a terrorist. Like, what is this? And so we started looking at them individually, and she was retweeting a lot of posts about activists on the West Bank and in Gaza, and it was easy to see how this is exactly what a lot of terrorist organizations are also saying, and it like hit her that what she's doing is like putting herself on a watch list, and so when like she was having trouble going through security, much like we had like extra, I don't know, what do you call it, like pat downs, or we have to search your bag again, random selection, like, well, it's the third time this month, so I'm not sure how random this is, but, and suddenly it all made sense to her, like she's on a list, and I don't know.
No, it's a good question. I think it's something to keep reflecting on.
I love what you said about the kind of like, thinking about your artwork and that it's going to expire, that it's going to stop working, that it's going to lose its, it's going to either become valuable to serve its opposite ends, or that it's going to, stop working, right? And there's a kind of important temporal character that you guys embrace, right, which is partly about technological innovation, right, and the kind of now, imperative of new technology, right? But I was thinking, and so there's some really fascinating paradoxes with that, right, where you, like I'm so amused by the war tweets, right? Like I find that to be amazing, partly because we can't, like he was blocked for a year, so your entire, project is, can't be used anymore, right? And then it's no longer being archived. So all of those things about it. But I'm curious about the idea of you all recycling your own projects. So the idea of this crowdsourced, intelligence agency, thinking about it in a different register now, where the idea of the terrorist threat is a lot smaller than it was, like that was not the discourse, right? We weren't in the kind of Syrian war moment, right? Like, so is there another, it kind of goes to this other, like, what would can you imagine different ways to do that project now that might register the bottom end of the spectrum of like, or the moments of indeterminacy, or even the sock puppet kind of question about the right wing and misinformation? Can you think about that, or like have you thought about that in any of your other, even previous works, where you would go back and revise them?
That's such an interesting question, because the temporal nature of the projects is really, I think, at the forefront of them. So like with the CSIA, that project went on for so long, and we were kind of like, well, when do we end this project? Right. And it still is very relevant, because I would say even more prominent right now than focusing on intelligence agencies, there's more of an awareness of law enforcement surveilling protesters. And we saw this coming out, that Black Lives Matter protesters were being targeted by law enforcement. This was something that ended up getting leaked. This is, of course, not new, so I think that would be one way to potentially update it, and that was part of what we were thinking about with Boogaloo biases, law enforcement targeting, people at protests. So that was part of, in a way, I think, updating that project, then with the awareness of not wanting to create the same type of recuperable interactive database that we had previously. But I think this is also just a general problem for net art, and this is, APIs change, browsers change, languages develop, and so, it's something that, I don't know, we have videos, of course, to document them, and we have the stories that we tell about them, But I think this is definitely something that we're very aware of, again, going into each project, that it'll have a shelf life, so to speak.
But I actually think it's more honest in a lot of ways. Like I'm thinking of Hans Hakow, and he's talking about how art's only really art for this really short period of time, and then it just sort of like it exists, but once it's in a museum, it's like, it's dead. It's not really art. There's like mummies or something, it's like an artifact of something that at one time had cultural meaning. And I kind of like that our stuff like goes away, like after a certain point, at least in the form that it actually existed. And so if all that's left is like the documentation, it actually seems more appropriate.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In a way, but yeah, I think like the other part to what you're saying is interesting, because a lot of times we're trying to think of how to deal with a certain problem with our work, or something that didn't address, or something that changed in the meantime, and then like disinformation was something, we're trying to classify things according to like whether they're true or not, or and the next thing you know, like disinformation is something that's being created by the same algorithms that were being used to classify these things in the first place, and that's something that's, I don't know, we didn't see it coming, maybe some people did, but yeah, I don't know. That's a really good question, and something I don't think we have like a direct answer to. It's more like case by case, like try to feel it out as it happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, it is interesting too that for every project, you all publish a scholarly article about it, and you are like, so there's a kind of like triad of approach to the work, right?
Yeah.
Which is that it's making the project, exhibiting it, getting feedback from its interactive kind of performance installation. But then you've got these videos, which are really like, you have a style, and it's not the fake infomercial style. It's your own style with a lot of 9-inch nails, right?
Yep.
And so you've got this style and a feel for music. I'd say it's pretty amazing, and like atmospheric, right? But then you also publish a scholarly article about it. And that seems to like extend the lives of these things. But do you want to say something about, like, are there thoughts on that? Because I just think as artists that go forward, right, it's a model of thinking about how to frame your own work and maintain it and document it that speaks to different audiences, right? That really thinks about different audiences. So do you want to, is there stuff you want to say about that, or how you developed this idea, this kind of like method with your practice, and why you felt like it's necessary to have those modalities?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah. Well, the 9-inch nails is because they open source everything, so that's kind of nice, and it tends to work well. But,
yeah, there's a lot to pick from.
Yeah. But yeah, with the different audiences, that's a really good question, because usually when we're making a project, we really want to speak to, or somehow get through to the technocrats that are developing these technologies, and get them to think about the problems inherent in the systems that they're creating, and I don't know if we've actually ever done that, but that's usually one of the goals. And then the other goal is to reach out to like the public in a way that makes it like understandable, not super scary, but maybe not necessarily entertaining, but engaging enough that they'll think about certain issues, and longer than when they're just like, it's in front of them with the project. Like there'll be like a takeaway, and they can become a little bit more critical about the way that they interface with the world. And then there's also just like a lot of things that we learn through research or through making the project that we can't embody in an object or an experience, so that we end up just having to write about through like a discursive practice.
Yeah, I think otherwise some of that knowledge wouldn't be documented, it would be lost in a way, so it's a way of sharing that. I mean, for me, the audience that I'm the most interested in reaching is the public, the non-expert, not the technocrat. So maybe that's a bit of a distinction between us. And so in some ways I find the academic writing to be really unsatisfying, because it's very few people are going to read it, it's usually behind a paywall, and when you're making an artistic project, it can be out in the public realm, and you can really have a lot more interactions, and I think it can have a bigger impact outside of a really small group. But I do think that there's so many dimensions of what we learn and experience in these projects that we can pass on to, different audiences, and we are thinking of it in that way. Yeah.
Great. Students, any other questions? No more questions?
It's the end of the
Yeah,
semester.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank
I know
you
how that
so
goes.
much. That was amazing.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah, thank you.
And reminding students that we will, to come down and sign out, even for those of you who came in at the
Fell down the
end.
stairs.
And that we have office hours. I have office hours tomorrow, and